Hello, I hope you're well today. I'd like to share with you the story of Scylla and Charybdis, two aquatic monsters that Odysseus encountered on his journey. I hadn't planned to include them this month, but when I was working on my scroll, I'd added in a rock, and then the area beside the rock reminded me of a whirlpool, and these two creatures, Scylla and Charybdis, are indeed a rock and a whirlpool. And since I've already got my rock, we're going to work on a whirlpool today. And this isn't going to be a literal whirlpool. I'm not going for any sort of realism. This is intended to be a suggestion of a whirlpool or a great chaotic event. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm only going to use one stitch. I'm using chain stitch because I like the kind of smooth curved lines that it makes, and I'm going to be using a variety of different colors from ranging from very very dark to very light and bright colors in shades of blues and greens. And I'm just going to load up 2 or 3 strands. I'm going to vary that too. I'm going to load that up on my needle, not particularly long lengths, and I'm going to sew till I run out, and then I'm going to switch up a color. And I'm going to be creating kind of vaguely oval shaped lines that overlap each other and fill in the space that I have here that reminded me of a whirlpool in the first place. So let me tell you about the story of Scylla and Charybdis. Now, when my kids were young, they went through quite a big phase where they were very interested in different myths and legends. Now, I had not heard of Scylla and Charybdis before we read this particular book, but it turns out that they show up in a few different places, and I'll tell you about that in a little bit. But let me first tell you their story. So, well, Scylla and Charybdis are described as two monsters that occupied some space in a narrow channel in the sea. And Scylla is described as a six-headed monster that lived on a rock. And Charybdis is described sometimes as a whirlpool and sometimes as a monster that would create a whirlpool. The story was that if you tried to stay far away from one of these creatures, you would end up getting caught up by the other one. And supposedly there is a phrase, being caught between Scylla and Charybdis. I personally have not heard of that phrase, but interestingly enough, the only other time that I've heard of these two creatures show up is in a series of children's books that my kids also really liked, called the series of Unfortunate Events. The characters in these books were often faced with difficult decisions, and apparently in two instances the book references Scylla and Charybdis. And just today I found out that they are also mentioned in a song by the Police, by the band The Police, called Wrapped Around Your Finger. I've known that song for a long time, but never really given its meaning a lot of thought. And it turns out there are several mythological references in that song. So if you're interested, go go look up a version of that on YouTube that has the lyrics and you'll hear them. And perhaps like me, you didn't actually even know what the lyrics were before this. So as you can see, all I'm doing is creating ovals with my chain stitch in varying colors, dark and light, ovals that spiral down towards the bottom in the shape of a tornado or a funnel or a whirlpool, vaguely in that shape. And this is going to take me a very long time. But I wanted to share it with you. There's nothing complicated about it. I'm just working in ovals. And if you're wondering why am I working in ovals rather than circular shapes, well, it turns out that has to do with the way that we see circles. So when we look at a circular shape, it looks round. When we're looking straight at a circular shape, it looks round. But as soon as I start to tilt it and angle it, it no longer is a circular shape. It's now an oval. And as I keep rotating it, it gets more and more squashed in one direction. So that's what I'm recreating on my scroll here. that that illusion that we're looking at a circle but from an angle. So we're not looking straight on it, we're looking at it sideways. I'm following the shape that was created by the background, that was unintentionally created by the background. It also allows me to create what appears to be a much bigger shape than if I had tried to do a full circle. If I'd done a full circle, it would have been quite small, as you can imagine there. So so I did a little bit of research on Scylla and Charybdis. The interesting thing that I came across was a discussion about how these two monsters were not actually monsters. What they were metaphors for some of the dangers that are faced by people that were going out to sea and encountering the unknown out there beyond the world that was comfortable and safe to them. So that as an idea that, the rocks in and of themselves were dangerous, and a whirlpool in and of itself was dangerous without inventing a monster. But I guess it made a better story to say that these things were monsters. So that kind of felt like something that I did want to put into my scroll here, because we're not actually creating fish and seashells and octopi and all of those creatures. We're creating a representation of those, and that's just in the same way that the idea of these monsters was a representation of the fears that sailors would have had. And without getting too philosophical and deep, that's something to think about. So it was what I was thinking about while I was stitching this. And how do I know when I'm going to be finished with this? I have no idea, but I feel like I've got enough of the blues and greens, and I'm going to add white. You can see here that my spirals are kind of overlapping each other in a quite a random way. So the effect that I want to go here is that there's some chaotic swirling mass, and I don't want it to be too regular or predictable. And by not drawing in the lines, it allows me the freedom to make this fairly chaotic and random. So that my process is actually of benefit here. But if you felt like you would be more comfortable following a line with your stitches, you can absolutely do that. But keep in mind, if you want to give this free form, freewheeling type of thing a try, then this is a great place to do it, because you want this to look random and unplanned and unpredictable. And if something doesn't quite look the way you want it to, just add another layer of stitching on top. And to tell you the truth, there are several places here where things didn't quite go as I wanted them to, and I just added more on top. And I'm not even going to tell you where those places are. And maybe you noticed them, maybe you didn't. It doesn't really matter. But I can tell you that it took me many hours to finish this piece, so I'm certainly not going to include many hours of me repeatedly doing the same stitch. I think this is something that you can sit and do while you're watching television or watching another YouTube video or listening to music. Maybe the Police song, or maybe you might want to find an audiobook of the the series of unfortunate events. There's 13 books in that series. It starts with a bad beginning. It works its way through a series of alliterative titles to simply the end. I will tell you, it's not a happy ending. And I believe that the books that have the references to Scylla and Charybdis are The Vile Village and the Ersatz elevator. So you can take a look at those if you like. And happy stitching. It's great to see you again here, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye for now.